is grounded on that. And within that, we'll also talk about what's already been done in terms of the obligations, the charge, if you will, and then review the proposal for 3-year-old special education services, talk about the timeline, get your feedback on that. And then we will, as we are sort of transitioning out of the meeting or preparing to transition, we will transition to the co-chairs who are going to help us with a review process to the chair, excuse me, and then we'll go from there. So more on the big picture, the chair will help frame that, and I will support that discussion, and then we will be good to go. So in terms of introductions, it would be great if you just sort of drop you may all know one another, but just to be sure, drop your name and who you are here representing, not in the chat. Just put it in the chat. That would be great. And then we'll just get underway. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. So it's there for all who want to see it, and we will get going. Thank you. And anyone who hasn't put their name and title in the chat, please do. And in the meantime, I will want to switch slides, Erin?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so here we are. These are we're going to call them our ground rules or operating principles. And at the top, we have the norms of collaboration. We're really working to promote a spirit of inquiry, which is, let's make sure we all understand. And we can do that by pausing, paraphrasing, and probing for specificity. So if there is something, you're always welcome to reframe it in your own words, and then to ask more questions about key components that may help your expanded understanding. We are really inviting you all to put ideas on the table. And in doing that, paying attention to self and others, and to presume positive intentions of everyone who's here and those who help prepare for tonight, even if they are not with us at the moment. So we're starting with a benefit of the doubt position. From a technical perspective, we know not everyone likes to speak up in Zoom sessions, so you're welcome to use the chat to share your responses or ask questions. I will be routinely reflecting what's in the chat, in part for the recording's sake, and just because to make sure we're all sort of tracking that, because if we're listening deeply, we may not be paying quite so much attention to it. We invite you to raise your hand if you prefer to speak, and we will start and end on time, of course, and we invite you to check your electronics and make sure they are silenced, and to sort of be with us by disengaging from them throughout the presentation. And then lastly, we've added a parking lot section, because we realize that in some of these sessions, good ideas may come up, or things that are tangentially related, maybe not outlined in terms of, sort of maintaining our consciousness about what's in the scope of the charge. And they may be tangentially related, so we don't want to lose them. So we will be maintaining a parking lot for that purpose. And that's our story. And with that, Erin, I will turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you. And Jamie Mishu is going to start us off as soon as I can. There you go. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, so just a reminder, since there are several LDs concerning CDS and the work that we do in the birth to 5 population, we wanted to start with an explanation of the 4 major tasks included in LD 255 that we are working on tonight. So the first major task is the development of a plan for moving Part C under its own quasi-independent government agency with an independent governing board. The second is the provision of a current or proposed MOU between DOE and DHHS. The third is a description of how this plan will address each of the 16 minimum components for a statewide comprehensive system of early intervention services for infants and toddlers with disabilities, which are required under federal law per the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And fourth, a detailed timeline for implementation, including a description of any needed resources, statutory or regulatory changes, or any other information that is necessary to implement this plan, which will be a topic of discussion during tonight's meeting. As you'll see on the next slide, the good news is 2 out of 4 of these tasks have been completed. So we have had an MOU between DOE and DHHS in place for quite some time, and it was due for updating this past summer. So we drafted a new MOU between DOE and DHHS at the end of the summer 2021, and it's currently awaiting signature in the commissioner's office. So that piece is in place, and we do have our previous MOU that we can share. In addition, we have worked on a description for how the plan for moving Part C under its own quasi-independent government agency will address all of those required components under IDEA, and we have outlined that. These components are monitored by the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, and we're required to report on these via an annual performance report, which all states, including Maine, have been doing since 1994.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm going to turn it over to Roberta Lucas.
Good evening, everyone. Additionally to the LD 255, which asks us to address the provision of special education services for 3-year-olds, the proposed provision of services will look something like this, taking into consideration that the changes are also initiated in LD 386. And we are talking about 3-year-olds who are part of 619 3 to 5-year-olds. So there will be remaining 9 regional sites. We would think rebranding might look something like Maine Early Intervention Services. And under IDEA Part C Early Intervention Services, children birth to 2 will remain in those 9 regional sites. Services would be delivered through the Individual's Family Service Plan, the IFSP, and the IFSP it identifies the priorities, the resources, and the concerns of the family through early intervention services, and receives these under the Maine receives IDEA federal funds to address those, and it's the Maine Early Intervention Services. We're thinking that 4-year-olds would be moved to the SAU under LD 386. 619 services would fall to the SAU for children ages 4 and above. Maine receives IDEA federal grant for those children. And we would change our services from an IFSP to an IEP under 619 for 3 to 5-year-olds. So the 4-year-olds would have an IEP under the SAU, and services would be delivered through an IEP for the free and appropriate education. And 5 to 22-year-olds also remain with the SAUs. They also receive an IEP and Maine receives IDEA grant funds for them as well for the free and appropriate education. Yet to be determined, the preschool special education programming, PSEP, possibly, Part B 619 education guidelines for children. We would have to look at the children ages 3. Maine receives IDEA funds for children 3 to 5, and the services will have to be delivered through an IEP for the free and appropriate education for 3-year-old children, and the provision of services will be addressed under both 386 and this LD 255. Next slide. So in LD 386, in their meeting last month, they looked at 3 options. And so we're going to share these 3 options with you. And we took a straw vote just to kind of get an understanding of where some of their preferences or ideas might look at. And one of the preferences for 3-year-olds was to remain with the quasi-state agency, where FAPE was the obligation of the quasi-state agency, created within the main DOE, oversight by Special Education Services Department, contracted agencies providing those services. Current CDS staff would also be providing case management and IEP implementation. We would rebrand under PSEP, Preschool Special Education Program, and facilitation from transition from Part C to Part B. That was one option that was considered. A second option was the hybrid model, where FAPE is the obligation of the SAU, and oversight by main DOE, the individualized by the SAU, and there would be a menu of choices that would possibly be available. Provision of services, staffing, administrative oversight, eligibility requirements, including evaluation, child find, eligibility meetings, transportation, data system choice, support referrals, coordination of services, case management, and facilitation of transition from Part C to Part B. The third option that was possibly considered was FAPE's obligation to the SAU. Main DOE monitors the SAU responsibility for enrollment of children in the catchment area, and each SAU would determine how they would provide services for 3-year-old children. They could create a regional preschool programming or continue to contract with the preschool providers for services. They would provide staffing, provide transportation, and facilitate the transition from Part C to Part B. Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you to take the temperature.
Yeah, thanks, Roberta. So from a viability standpoint, what we're interested in, we'll give you a minute to look at this if it's helpful and just sort of let it sink in. But we're really interested in which of these options you think might be the most viable and why. And we would just love for you to think aloud and sort of share what you're observing. So I'll give you a minute and I'll be quiet. And when you're ready, if somebody wants to put their hand up, I'll be most grateful to the first one who's willing to dive in. Carrie, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I sit on the 386 committee as well, and I did want to offer a little bit of insight in some of the conversation that we had, especially when we were reviewing the hybrid model. There was a lot of talk about transitions, and I just wanted to make it clear that a lot of times when providers think of transitions versus when families think of transitions, that's 2 very different things. And so while it could eliminate some paperwork transitions, there would be some additional transitions for students because naturally, as you transition from preschool to kindergarten, whether you're with the SAU or not, you're going to be going to a different building and different set of principals and special ed teachers, so on and so forth. So I wanted to we had that conversation, and there was a lot of conversation about how it would lessen transitions. And I just wanted to point out as a parent that it seems like there might be more transitions in that hybrid model. I'll just say as a parent, I voted 3-2-1. And I did that because I feel like getting our preschool kids more in tune with our special education SAUs, where they're going to spend the majority of their time, who already have programming in place and services in place for their K through 22 students, would probably mean that transitions would get easier for families. Staff would get to know these children better, and that it would help alleviate some of the wait lists that we're seeing. But that being said, there still always needs to be the option for a placement in a special purpose private program, just like there is for current K through 22 students. And I say that because right now, the way CDS is working, when kids are ages 3 to 5, children do, or families do have a voice and a choice as to what preschool program they're going to go to right now. And sometimes being in a large public pre-K program is not the right fit for a student who might be smaller in stature, because there's a big difference between a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and who might have some significant needs. And so I know sometimes out of district placements K through 22 can be really difficult to obtain. I'd like to see some more flexibility in that option for pre-K students, to be able to look at some other preschools that would still give access to mainstream students that might better fit their needs. I'd also just want to give a heads up around certifications when we do go to our public schools at some point, whether it be for 4-year-olds or 3 and 4-year-olds, that there is a different certification for pre-Ks for our teachers. And I know Chapter 115 is taking into consideration changing some of that language. That would be concerning for me if our teachers in public schools did not have a pre-K certification, or had a pre-K certification without the necessary credentials that are needed now to get a pre-K certification, the necessary classes that are needed to get a pre-K certification. It's two very different styles and curriculums of teaching. Pre-K kids have many different needs than our K through 12 kids. And in order to be able to do child finding correctly and make sure those students are being identified, I strongly believe that those teachers need to have those credentials, and they need to have the classes behind those credentials.
Thank you.
I agree with Carrie on the Chapter 115. I think it's really important when you look at the credentialing of the teachers that are providing the education. I actually vote a little different. From my interpretation, I lean towards option 1, then 3, then 2, for a lot of the same reasons that Carrie had brought forward. But I keep going back to that individualization that's desperately needed. But I also lean towards the transitioning piece. Option 3 is a viable option because of the ability to be within the school district and to be able to transition more efficiently or effectively. I think option 1 in some areas of the state is more feasible or makes more sense. I think that, again, when you look at smaller class size, really individualizing those needs and really focusing on those goals in a smaller group setting, and depending on the type of agency that is being looked at, I think that those services can be provided effectively. So.
Thank you, Megan. Others, thoughts? In terms of viability? Hi, yes, thanks for putting your hand up.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't change my name on the screen for some reason, but Heather Martin from Maine UIC.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Just call me Maine UIC, it's fine. Yeah, I think I keep mulling this over in my head, and sometimes I'll come out with different answers in my head and just experiences I've had, but I'm trying to also vision this in a system where we potentially could have federal legislation that has a pre-K entitlement and a childcare entitlement coming in, and how that pre-K does define 3 and 4-year-olds within that entitlement program. However, some of my worries are about the partnerships within childcare programs, and this comes within delivery of special education services too, because I think we have extremely well intentions with, within Chapter 124 of how public schools can partner with childcare. We have extremely hard work going on in DOE around that. However, we are still hearing from a lot of superintendents that are hesitant to create those partnerships. And I think I err on the nervous side of Carrie did about parents still having that choice, that if my 3-year-old is thriving in their childcare program that they've been in since birth and receiving services, and they have trust, and that there not be that that pull out to then transition and switch buildings, because we're talking about maybe trying to eliminate, further transitions. So I just think well, I don't have a straight answer. I was between 3 and 2. That however we come out with this in language is that we're really still working on that mission that the birth through, 8 system is really bridged through these 3 and 4-year-olds as well, heading into kindergarten eventually. And that least restrictive environment is central to what we choose.
Thank you. Others have thoughts about viability. You may like some things about one and other things about another, but when you look at this, where you see the viability and why. Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, I think going kind of touching on that least restrictive environment piece and where we really want kids in their public preschool, especially we have a lot of districts in my area where we have public pre-K. And what we've been finding is that kids are needing a lot more support, than we as CDS can kind of put into those programs. So I think there needs to be more discussion if we go with option 3 about what the school districts need to put into place. So do they need to have special education preschools on site, or would they partner and use kind of the existing preschools? And just getting that information, I think, will help to be able to determine what model is best.
Thanks, Sarah. Erin, I see you put in the chat for national context. Most states have 3-year-olds in their SAUs in contract with providers to serve children this age. And SAUs would have administrative oversight, or they do in the national context, and contracted providers deliver the service. So that seems to be the prevailing model. Thank you, Deb.
I was just going to echo a little bit of what Sarah said. I'm a former special ed director from Portland and working as a consultant right now. And SAUs are in pretty different places, but it's also an opportunity for SAUs to build programs so that we have more programs for kids. And we've been deficient in that area in CDS. And it's an opportunity for SAUs to partner with community providers. And we already have some districts that are doing that very successfully. So I like the idea of the hybrid model because I think it offers some flexibility for both districts and for providers to be able to meet the needs of kids. But that's all I was going to add.
Thank you. Anyone else want in here? Nancy?
I think what's really important as we move forward is one of the things that needs to be looked at is the levels of responsibility, and this is part 3, section 619. So if we go with option 1 in the quasi-state agency, it's important, similar to how option 2 and option 3 puts the responsibility to to the FAPE obligation on an SAU. I think there's a very clear separation of power. With option 1, we would need to develop our quasi-state agency to ensure that there's a governing board, but also there's clear understanding about what that governing board does, what the quasi-state agency does, and how and what the department does. I just wanted to put that out there when we're looking at these options.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carrie?
I just wanted to say from when I was listening to the legislative sessions, and this is just some food for thought, back in the spring, one of the concerns and what led them to thinking about keeping this semi-quasi state agency of CDS, which is under that option 1 model, was because of the retirement plan of CDS workers who are currently working. And even if they were to get jobs in early intervention with SAUs, they would have to abandon their retirement plans and start over. So that is something that was of high concern for the legislators on the Educational and Cultural Affairs Committee, and just something to think about when, not that that should weigh in on your decision. I'm just saying that was one of those red flags that nobody could let go of during those legislative sessions and those hearings back in the spring.
Thank you. All right, let's keep moving. Want to go to the next slide?
So thank you for all that input. We're just going to share from the 386 group. This is some of the proposed 3-year-old provision of services that they came up with, some of the additional insights that using the hybrid would allow SAUs to begin to understand what is entailed in supporting 3-year-old children. The hybrid is already being piloted by some of the unmet need for preschool education children in local SAUs. And then once the SAUs have an idea of what the provision of service will be, there will be more consistency between preschool and school-age children and their services. Option 2 would allow time for SAUs to transition to become fully responsible via option 3. There could be an offering of an opportunity for SAUs to build relationships with outside providers and agencies that they don't currently have. It could reduce transitions, and early development of relationships between families and SAUs would be in place, which has already been mentioned by several of you, that relationship building is crucial and important. So that was where 386 group, those were some of their insights. Carol?
Yeah, thanks, Roberta. We're wondering if you have any additional insights or any questions about what you're seeing. Okay. Hearing none. Anybody want more time to look at it? Just want to make sure it's not that you're still processing, and I don't want to get ahead of you. Okay, let's keep moving. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to review the proposed timeline for some of the actions that are anticipated by this LD. In terms of the quasi-governmental agency, we would be working from January 1st, 2022 to 2023 to develop the DOE in conjunction with the AG's office, a plan for developing that quasi-governmental agency, developing that external board that Nancy alluded to in her comment. And then once that is drafted, that would be reviewed before the 131st legislative session. And then after the advisory group review and legislative approval, we would like to begin rebranding Maine Early Intervention Services starting as soon as July of 2022. We have a large pot of money for this that we have set aside. I wouldn't say a large pot of money. We have set aside some money, some federal grant money that's come in, and it's available until 2023. And so we would like to think about separating out Part C services from Part B services without a delay, so that we can start kind of understanding and conceptualizing the difference between these two services. And then after advisory group review and legislative approval, CDS Part C extended option to the fall of the 3rd birthday. That's by no means set in stone, but we would have to provide an application to OSEP in May of 2022, and then we could initiate that starting in July 1 of 2022. Now, as you as we reviewed the last time, that would be a small subset of children who could extend Part C services out beyond the 3rd birthday. They would have to, as a reminder, be in Part C and qualify for Part B services. So just to reiterate that point. And then 3-year-old services, there'd be a joint recommendation by LD 386 and 255. It's going to be included in a written proposal reviewed by the legislature in February of 2022. So we're going to, with the help of this group, the advisory committee and the advisory committee for LD 386, come up with a proposal and then review that. And then from January to January, 22 to 23, the DOE and the Attorney General's office will review and make recommendations to statutory and regulatory changes that may need to be addressed in the updates of these provision of services.
Thanks, Erin. Nancy, I see your hand up. We welcome feedback on the timeline or questions.
Help her.
Nancy, you're still muted.
Is it currently a quasi-state agency? CDS?
It is, but it is flawed in that it doesn't have it's flawed in the way it was developed because it doesn't have an external board. The current statute is written, from what I understand, that the Commissioner of Education is the external agency. So that would be adjusted and corrected in this process.
Does CDS already have bylaws?
We do not.
So looking at, it does, looking at the order, I would think it was first adjusting the statute exactly as you're saying to develop the board or to hire an executive director to develop a board with some guidelines and then they'll have to create bylaws and things. One of the things that I was hoping would be able to happen for this quasi agency is one of the things that is seriously limiting to the Developmental Disabilities Council is we are not legally allowed to do any fundraising at all. And it might be nice for this organization to one day be able to fundraise if they want, if they ever wanted to do something outside or expand. So looking at how that's built for kind of long term, if there are anything else that they want to do, especially would be interesting. I see Sarah, she might have an answer.
Yeah, I called on her and didn't realize I was muted. So there you go. Hi, Sarah.
Oh, okay. I can talk. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
we
we
can.
can see
Oh,
you.
okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
So my original question was, I didn't know what the Attorney General's office's role was when we were mentioned in the timeline, but now I think I understand that you want help constructing a new statute that has some of these elements in it. In response to Nancy's question about setting up a board for the quasi-state entity, what I thought might be useful for this group to look at are some of the other education organizations that we have that function in a way similarly to what we're envisioning the new quasi-state entity. And so, for example, if you look at the two magnet schools, the Maine School of Science and Mathematics and the Maine Ocean School, if you want to look specifically at the special ed area, the Governor Baxter School for the Deaf has a board, because I think ideally the objective should be to get into the proposed statutory amendments, the composition of the board for the IEU. And so those are the places that I would recommend starting to look. I mean, obviously, I'm part of this commission or committee or advisory group, not because of my outstanding knowledge of early childhood, which I barely survived myself, but because I can help you structure things like that. I know that the legislature struggled last session with what the actual verbiage needed to be for some of the things they wanted to do. And I'm certainly willing to help with that. But obviously, I'm going to be looking to everybody else in this group not named me for what the actual ideas are.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Sarah. Yes,
Thank you,
that is
Sarah.
how we are going to be using the AG's office.
Okay, good. Just checking because I was like, whoa, how did we get in here?
I think another question that I have that I mentioned earlier was just kind of confirmation that is it true that if we chose an extended option for, say, 3-year-olds, it would
Mhm.
be 3-year-olds until the fall, until the school year? It would not be 3-year-olds for the entire year of their birth?
That's
So
correct. It would be, yeah.
The way IDEA's extended Part C option operates is that it keys to the school year following. So it's the school year following 3, following 4, following 5, and then it's done essentially.
So again, and I just think it's important for me to say this out loud in both groups. So if an individual turns 3 in May, and then they are able to benefit from the extended Part C if the family chooses until September.
That's right. So
But
there wouldn't
not
be a
after
summer.
that.
But again, Nancy,
What?
that's if that's what Maine chooses. So Maine could choose extending Part C to fall after age 3, extending Part C to fall after age 4. See where I'm going?
Ah,
So it's
Thank
first,
you.
it's the state's choice what to apply for as the end date. But the key is that the end date keys to the beginning of a school year and not to a birthday, because that's in effect what the extended Part C is trying to address. That I think every state has acknowledged that it's difficult to make those transitions at like any time during the year.
Thank you,
that's
Sarah.
extremely helpful. Thank you.
Roberta?
Just to remind everybody that the extended Part C means that children have to qualify for Part B. And that it's a very small subgroup of children, and that their parents are refusing or declining FAPE for their child should they choose the extended Part C for children ages 3 till the school year, beginning of the school year. So it's a refusal of FAPE, and it's only if they qualify for Part B services.
I'm going to change that just a little bit. It's a delay of FAPE. Okay. So it's a delay of FAPE. So they
Yep.
would be saying, I don't choose FAPE right now. I'm going to delay when I start receiving that free appropriate public education.
Carrie?
So if a parent decides to extend Part C and then realizes it doesn't work, are they committed for the year or can they change?
Anytime. They can change anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, comments on the timeline, feedback.
I would also just add one more thing that Jamie reminded us, that there's a provision in the current budget that will allow all states to do this without an extended option to the 3rd birthday, through the 3rd birthday. So if we may know as soon as December that all states can automatically extend Part C for those children who qualify, not for every Part C child, but for kids who qualify for Part B services and they're in Part C services, there may be a pathway to extending that to the next school year, the start of the next school year, without having to make a application to OSEP.
And Deb, thanks for putting in the chat because this is being considered federally. Thank you. Okay. So I see a tail, Sarah Forster. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Let's move along, shall we? Transition to next steps.
So let's look at our next steps. So our first step, we're going to generate a written proposal, and we're going to be doing that in December of 2021. We also are going to hold up to 2 additional advisory group meetings scheduled for December and January so that this group can meet together as an entire group, a whole group. Initially, we have done 2 separate groups, and to help you facilitate some conversations about these ideas in an additional format. And then when these reports, we have 3 of them, as you know, 2 of them are contained within 255 and 386. We're going to review those with the legislature in February 2022. The chair of this committee, who is Nancy Cronin, and the co-chairs of 386 would be joining us in the legislature to review the input and recommendations. And then for next steps, we're going to transition to our chair, and I'm going to ask Carol to help us do that.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. Yes, we will be sort of widening the WE, if you will, in terms of designing our sessions and pulling all of you together. So we have deliberately divided into groups just because we wanted to make sure that all of your questions were answered and you had adequate time to weigh in on this learning and input process. And now you'll all be working together. And Nancy, I'm sure you have more that you'd like to share about that. So the floor is yours, and I'm here to support in any way I can.
Thank you very much. And could you shut the slideshow off? Yeah, great. Now, so there was a meeting with Aaron Frazier and Roberta Lucas earlier today, and what was decided was we would end up having these meetings. We would make sure that everybody was on the same page, and then we would get a written outline of what they're thinking of doing. I doubt it's going to be a whole lot different than what we've already seen, but it'll be on paper for us to be able to look at. And then we're going to meet as a big group. So not just us, but also there's been a group that has met in the afternoon. So we're going to bring everybody together so everybody can hear their own comments or everybody's comments. We'll review and talk in detail, probably in breakout groups, so everybody can have some good conversations and debate about what they think should happen and what the plan should look like. Review the MOU, look at all of that stuff, and then create recommendations as a group that I can come back to the legislature and represent you folks as opposed to, so I know what to say to the legislature, basically. And that's what I want to do, is I want to make sure that we're really covering all of these different topics. In addition to the proposals, there will also be opportunities to be able to say other concerns about whatever people want to be speaking. So this is not going to be this will be much more about getting not just your input, but getting agreement within the group. So building consensus. We are thinking that it's going to be 2 sessions, a session in December and a session in January. I'm thinking 2 hours might work. There was a question last time about what time, and we were thinking 3 to 5. So that we're not doing 6 to 7:30, in which if you have young kiddos, that's bedtime. So that might be more challenging. But still, it's after the school day. If that doesn't work, like whatever we want to do, we can do. We can talk about. But that's the idea, because now the work begins, the work of bringing us all together and creating recommendations for the education committee begins. So what do you think? Does that seem like a decent plan? Yeah, seeing a lot of nods. Great. So that is and Sarah, thank you so much. I had written those down. But that's extremely helpful. I don't want to lose that. So that's the plan. The plan is bringing everybody together in December, hopefully having the information a week or so ahead of time. I'll meet with Carol. If anybody else wants to join me in that and developing the agenda, that's fine. But really what the plan is take what they offer, break it into small chunks, maybe throw some questions around it that are open-ended to enjoy it, to facilitate conversations, and then be able to, at the end in January, actually have some recommendations that can be stated. There it is.
Okay, Carrie?
Carrie, yeah.
Nancy, or are you able, or Erin or Roberta, whoever has the answer to this, but after we make our recommendations to the committee in January, what are the next steps after that?
I suspect I'll be invited to be at the at the education committee to speak and state our recommendations as well. So,
But I guess what I'm asking is, where does it go from there after we make our recommendations to the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee?
first, I think oh,
Erin, you wanna?
Yeah, so we are putting a written proposal together, and we would be following the timeline presented in this, as long as as long as the legislature and this advisory group feels comfortable with that, we'd be, largely in the next year creating the adjusted statutory language around the quasi-state agency. And we would be separating out and rebranding Part C as soon as the summer. We would be looking at that. We're going to wait until we have the understanding of the extension that's provided. And then, this committee would be really looking at if we have the capacity to extend 3-year-old Part C services to the next school year, would people be interested in extending it further than that? So we would be putting all of that proposal together, and then getting kind of approval through the legislative process, and then just continuing that work. So we would have the state agency that would be reviewed in the next legislative season, the 131st legislative season, and then but we would not delay rebranding Part C, because we think it's time and we're ready to do that.
I think this is a resolve. So what will have to happen, I believe in this, I'm hoping Sarah will confirm or deny, but because this is a resolve, the education committee will have to decide whether or not they're going to submit a new bill. And then there'll be a public comment period to be able to determine what the language is going to be, and what authorization they'll be giving to the department on the plan moving forward. So there'll be, after the resolve, there'll be a new bill and debate potentially. And I see you, Sarah. Go for it.
So what?
You just muted yourself.
You just
There
muted
you go.
yourself.
See, it's been a very long day. There's been much Zooming. Anyway, and the cat is hungry, which is why he keeps walking back and forth and forth. What I was trying to figure out was, is it your vision that this year we're getting, and I'm going to use this in quote, concept approval, and then over the summer and into next fall, we're writing the language, and then they're going to put in a title, not in January, but for next January, that's going to have our recodified, our language essentially.
Yeah.
I hope that they put in language in January that authorizes something moving next. It might not be the technical language, the nuance might be, it will have to be the next year. Yeah, I think,
Okay.
but I hope they give direction on the road we're going. I hope they give a stamp of approval on what option we're going on, so that we can move on it, because without that stamp of approval, we're spinning our wheels, and that's where we've been on and off for as long as I've been around.
Right. All I'm trying to avoid is them deciding to assign poor Hillary the last weekend of the session to come up with the language that will pull Part C out of the current statute and do all the stuff that we all know, well, many of us know needs to be done. But like, they dump it on poor Hillary at the very end, and she's never going to be able to incorporate everything we talk about. That's all I was trying to figure out. So if what you're telling me is we're going to have time after this session to do the technical work to make sure the thing that actually ends up being the law makes sense, I'm all good.
I can't guarantee it.
Okay.
I would be willing to bet you that that is exactly, if we don't provide language or suggestions or ideas in the middle of the session, and it's going to be, which way do you guys want to go? Okay, this is the way. Here's some ideas for language. Then they'll make Hillary do it, because they're just not as nuanced as what you just said, and they're not going to want to go. Unless they put a timeline in a bill that allows that to happen. But I don't think they're going to do that, because if they put a timeline in a bill that allows that to happen, then they're reelected and we have a new education committee. I think they're going to push it through this time, or we're going to end up staying in stagnant world, in limbo. Because if this goes to yet another education committee, we're going to be in the exact same spot. You know, this is the third cycle of this exact same stuff that I've seen happen. We've got to get it through on the second year of a committee, or it's going to be limbo.
And to throw another iron in the fire, Erin, how does this align with the changes to Muser?
I mean, it aligns well
Okay.
because we're pulling out C from Muser, we're separating Part C and Part B from Muser, whereas they're lumped together right now.
Okay.
When
So
is
that
that
would
going
be-
to come up?
As a practical matter, Carrie,
Sorry.
we've got to get the statute fixed before the rule. I mean, there's a sequencing issue here, because doing things in the rule without the proper statutory layout doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah, that was
Thank
it.
you.
I asked.
Yeah, we got to get the sequencing right on this, because I know we'd all like this to be so, but everything cannot, in fact, be fixed through the rule.
Right. And I was concerned that if we were to put the cart before the horse. But thank you.
Okay.
So
So
that
any other questions or, yeah, Nancy?
not necessary. It's detailed that we can do later.
Okay. Any other questions or observations about what you're hearing in terms of this transition or immediate next steps? Okay, so we will be in touch about scheduling, so stay tuned on that front. And I want to thank everyone for your time and attention tonight. And we'll look forward to seeing you after the holiday. Happy long weekend, happy holiday. And thanks again for your participation. And we'll close the session.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everyone.